It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 712, that's 712 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. Hey, I have another great episode lined up for you today. You're really going to enjoy this. My guest today is Steve Norman. Steve is the author of a book titled Future-Proof Sales Strategy, 7 Steps to Rise Above the Chaos and Transform Your Team and Take Charge of Your Career. Now, in today's conversation, Steve and I discuss his 7-step strategy to future-proof your selling. It's written from the perspective of the organization and the sales manager, as well as you, the individual seller, the individual contributor. And one of the areas we're going to explore in depth is the necessity for individual contributors and teams alike to become much, much more proficient in the middle of the funnel sales skills. You know, things we take for granted: discovery, qualification, needs analysis, and so on. And these are the steps I believe are the ones that are the most important steps in your sales process. And we're going to talk about why perhaps we even need to take a cue from the hyper-specialization that's occurred with our outbound sales processes and develop some real specialists in some of these middle-of-the-funnel sales steps. So this is an enlightening and eye-opening conversation. Make sure you stick around for it. Before we get to Steve, I do want to take a quick minute to talk with you about the Sales House. Now, in sales, success is all about doing the things, both significant and subtle, that make the difference between winning and losing. And in the Sales House, I help you master the skills that will elevate you from average to excellent. Now, you know how to build a relationship with a prospect. You've been doing it your entire sales career, but come into the Sales House and we'll show you how to do it better. You've been trained how to do a discovery call or qualify a prospect, those middle of the funnel steps I just talked about. Come into the Sales House. I'll teach you how to do those better. You've been coached how to work a deal. Every week we have coaching. I'll coach you how to work those deals more effectively and productively. So if you're not currently completely satisfied with the trajectory of your career, well, then the Sales House is the resource you need to reach the next level and the level above that. So come learn how to be the best version of you in the Sales House. Visit thesaleshouse.com. That is thesaleshouse.com. We'll look forward to seeing you there. All right, let's jump into today's conversation. Steve Norman, welcome to the show.
Hey, real pleasure to be here, Andy.
Pleasure to have you. So you're joining us all the way from where today?
Sydney, Australia, on the place called Collaroy on the Northern Beaches.
Like north of Bondi?
Oh, yeah. Bondi is south of the city.
Okay.
The Northern Beaches is north of the city. If you know a place called Manly.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking Manly. Actually, I've been to Manly, and that's why.
Okay.
The 2 beaches I knew, Manly and Bondi. Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just a little north of Manly.
Got it. Well, that's a beautiful area. Yeah. And also, since it's summertime there, it's 20 degrees here in New York City today. So 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So
okay.
I would trade places.
Yeah, no, it's lovely at this time of year.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Well, good. Well, thank you for joining me. So we're going to talk about your book. So you got a new book. For those of us who can see Steve, we are recording the video behind him. He's promoting himself well. Future-Proof Sales Strategy, the name of his book. 7 Steps to Rise Above the Chaos, Transform Your Team, and Take Charge of Your Career. So let me ask you a question. And this is one that I think, I don't know, at least I think about it. I think others think about it as well, is this whole concept of future-proofing is one I've thought a lot about, actually. And you make a good point in your book, is that, you know, the rate of change is so extreme these days. Certainly, it's not slowing down. Whether it's getting faster, I don't know. But I mean, certainly the rate of change is still very extreme. Is if things are changing so quickly, how can you really future-proof yourself? Right? I mean, we can talk both an organizational or sales team level or an individual seller. And you outlined some sales structure, recommended sales structure in your book and so on. But you know, things change, right? I mean, it's at some point that's going to be outdated. So
no, it's a fair point. So the idea of the book is, okay, here's how you get your team and your structure like up to date and competitive in today's situation. But then the last portion of the book is about how to manage constant and ongoing change. Okay. So how to constantly evaluate what's happening on the horizon, look for those early indicators that things aren't working as well, and that we need to adapt again. And we need to keep aligning, keep adapting our sales machine. I liken it to a living organism, if you like, that needs to adapt, needs to change, needs to reflect, the company's priorities and what's happening in the market, and we need to be constantly adapting. And it's something sales teams probably haven't been, that great at, is managing change in the sales context.
Was that, if you look within an entire corporate structure and all the various departments, is sales less adaptable than others? I mean, you've worked for some big organizations.
No, I wouldn't say it's less adaptable. I'm just talking about the sales teams themselves. I wouldn't say it's less adaptable, but in general, change initiatives and even general business initiatives have got a pretty high failure rate. Around the 70% mark. So you need to be very serious about managing change and drive that through a pretty detailed structure. If you miss any key step in change management, things won't take hold.
Right.
Yeah. And we know salespeople will bounce straight back to their old practice.
Well, and I just, so to that point though, is there some thought that in our rush to adapt, is that we're adapting to a perception of change that maybe isn't really there in reality, that maybe things aren't changing quite as quickly as we think they are? I mean, I sort of get that sense. I mean, because you see it, and we'll see it in sales, right? Right now, there's a sort of, I'll call it the sales structure du jour sort of mentality. Is right now there's we've got a playbook, we've got inside sales, we've got our SDRs, we've really focused on specialized sales functions, and we're still talking about it like it's sort of new, but the fact is it's been around for almost 20 years now. In some cases longer, depending on the industry.
Yes.
And we know that's going to change, right? Because we're already I'm certainly seeing in the conversations I have with sales leaders that they're saying, well, this model, we went whole hog into it because this is what everybody said worked, and it's not working for us. So we're going to make some changes. Where do you see those changes coming from? I mean, and how do you really discern what is actual change you need to react to versus, like I said, the perceived change?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of categories of company or sales teams. There are some that really haven't moved to that specialization model at all, right? So I still see a lot of that where sales teams are running, say, in a regional team, and the regional manager is responsible for the target. And then what happens underneath that regional team, we don't really have much visibility, or we have some idea of the structure and what they're doing, but they're doing new business, they're doing managing deals, they're managing existing customers and expansion, they're going into new markets within that region, say, right? So that will be the old type of structure. So they've got an opportunity to
full lifetime rep, you're saying.
Yeah, that's right, to move towards some specialization. And then there's the organizations that were earlier to move into specialization, have the insight and so forth. But most of those organizations, maybe they've been running their acquisition inside sales engine for 10 years or 15 years. But a lot of what they're doing is what they were doing 10 years ago that was effective then. So I don't know if the structure is wrong in that sense. I really want to be auditing and inspecting what they're actually doing, and are they doing the right quality work. So I think that's a big change. Is a shift to be successful now. You have to be doing very high quality activity versus just hitting numbers, just driving quantity. That was enough before. Get 10 graduates in a room, teach them about your product, your advantages, give them a list of accounts to call, and you've got a pretty decent hit rate on just calling out or sending a pretty basic email. That has a very poor return these days. So, we at least need to be within that structure doing a much higher quality job there.
Yeah, well, this whole idea of the specialization is fascinating, and I think it's inevitable. I think it is the right way to go. I wonder if we have, though, the way that so many companies are implementing it is that they have the wrong people in the jobs, though. And give a perfect example is and I don't necessarily know the answer, but just a concern is that we have our outreach being done by the least experienced people, right? Our proactive outreach in really specialized roles. And I could make a compelling case that we should actually have our most experienced people doing outreach, because that first interaction is so critical that maybe it's not just about, if you actually get hold of someone, you shouldn't just be trying to use that call, that few minutes you have with them to set the next meeting. You should actually say, let's have a substantive conversation. I've got you on the phone. I've seen this work. I've implemented this model. If you get, more experienced people, I call the sharp end of the stick in my first book, you can actually engage people in a much different way, a much higher level that truly does accelerate the selling process. So, but we don't seem to have many people sort of open to these ideas, because we tend to think, and this is, I think, back to sort of a point you're making about sort of traditional views of things, is what's the point of saying, look, we're going to do the specialization if we're just basically putting a veneer of specialization on the old hierarchical structure we always used to use?
Yeah, look, I think, prospecting, gets a lot of attention, and we're talking about it. And definitely that's getting much harder, I believe, than it used to be. Customers are avoiding salespeople more. We know they're doing their research online and so forth. So it's a tough job. I'd say, to your point, it depends what you're selling, depends on the value of what you're selling. But I've seen inside sales teams be very effective with the right training. And maybe they're not fresh out of college. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're 3 to 5 years experience. You're able to take the sale right through to completion.
Yeah.
Up to, say, I don't know, 100,000 to 200,000 a year type of subscriptions. Mm-hmm. I think up to that level is pretty successful. Beyond that, I'd like that team. They probably need to engage, a field person to take the sale forward.
Right.
But I like the idea of, some of the teams I've set up is that inside person can continue as the main contact even for that account. And they're more like directing the field resource to sort of come in and do a specific job, because their field resource is, we know it's much more expensive, just in terms of salary, but in terms of their efficiency, how many meetings they can have, and all of that. We want to use that very carefully, very sparingly. So I like the idea of, how far can we take inside sales in the sales process, and then, even, like I say, even have them manage the sale right through.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because this is a I don't know, maybe that's a lack of oral tradition being passed down or something, but there's this perspective that, back 20 years ago, the field sales rep was this whole inefficiency thing. They could only make so many calls per day, and as someone who started my career as a field salesperson and really used primarily, I wouldn't even have called the sales teams I grew field sales teams, right? Because we spent
the sales team.
We spent 75% of our time on the phone, and then when we had to go travel, as I told you, I used to travel to Australia a lot, but I went with a specific intent and purpose, and everything else I handled phone and fax and email, right? So, that doesn't seem like it's that different today, right? Especially what you just described. Right. You have an inside person sort of directing it, and then if they need to invoke a field person, they bring that field specialist in. The model's not that different.
Sure. And I know I was in Dell from 1993 to 2006, right? Mm-hmm. And when we were heavily into inside sales from the beginning, and I think we mastered that balance of inside and outside, and we pushed it as far as we could. So for the large enterprise accounts, we probably had one to two or 1.5 inside people for each field person. to do all the preparation and administration, and just to keep that field person fully occupied. Two or three high quality meetings a day with high end enterprise customers, and of course the field person is doing a lot of their own appointment setting as well. But you've got this like support, and then in the what we call the medium sized accounts, say below 5,000 employees or 5,000 seats. It was more like 4 inside for a field person, right? And we played around with that number a lot. It was down to 3, and we sort of stretched it out to 6, and looked like about 4 was good. And that's where the inside person really owned the account and was really doing this direction.
Right.
At the enterprise level, the field guy probably owned it with inside supporting and following up more. And then when we went into what we small business, say below 1,000 employees or below 500, it was more like 10 or 12, right? So we would only get the field person involved if it was really worthwhile. If we came across a whale, the inside guy came across someone needing 300 PCs. All right, okay, we'll get. And you had to justify getting the field person in, right? So
which was always the case, right? I mean, at least in my experience, again, I wasn't working in an enterprise the size of Dell, but a lot of high growth startups, and as an executive, I had to sign off on all the travel. I mean, the whole theory was we traveled when we needed to. Otherwise, we could get through everything we needed remotely, which is, I said, it's sort of funny because people act like, sometimes like it's a revelation, but companies have been sort of doing this for a while. I think there was this perception that it wasn't quite that, that fields people, and there are certain industries where field people are in the field all the time. But in a lot of B2B situations, and certainly in the technology sphere I was in, we couldn't afford to be there all the time, right? We had to be judicious.
I guess we've got a different point of view, because I just think, I want to keep the field person fully occupied in the field as much as possible, and I just think it's going to be more efficient to have the inside work, the groundwork. A lot of that can be done more efficiently by someone who's at their desk the whole time, with access to the system and access to the CRM and doing all of that.
Well, I guess we're not that different. Actually, I was just saying is that the perception of currently today, if people look back 10, 20 years and say, that didn't work, it's really not that radically different. I mean, there's more specialization, but in a lot of the industries that are using the inside sales technology, and for Dell, for instance, almost always was heavily inside oriented. Even nominally field, I had nominal field people that all sat at headquarters and they traveled when they need to, but they were spending, 75% of their time inside.
Right.
So, all right. Well, let's talk about your book and your 7 steps of future-proofing your sales strategy, and because there's some really interesting things in there. And so step 1 was implementing the right sales structure. We sort of beat that to death here a little bit.
Sure.
But one thing that's really critical, you talk about recruit and promote the right talent. And the quote from the book about how shockingly ineffective traditional hiring practices are. My takeaway was that you were saying that's really perhaps the most important thing to be done. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying if you don't do anything else, do this better, do this differently. I think if, let's say you're running an inefficient sales structure, you don't have the best processes, but you're getting by. The one lever you can pull, or let's say you're running everything really well, the one lever you can pull to give you a lot of upside is to improve the quality of the people you have in all the key positions. And the way that we traditionally hire and the way that people still hire is mostly on gut feel.
Right.
It's from unstructured interviews. It's from people we know or people who are like us, or people who come into our office and we build rapport with. And of course, salespeople are really great. If they're not good at anything, they're good at coming into your office and making a personal connection, right? So we really need to have a more structured, scientific way of selecting salespeople. And these days, there's a lot of great tools around that would. You can do independent testing of people to see what their sales aptitude is like and what their how they're going to perform in different sales roles, whether that's a hunting role, or account management role, an inside role, and so forth. So we should be taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the assessments and the aptitude tests are good data points to have as part of the process, right? If it's about having a more structured hiring process. Yeah, I think they get oversold in terms of the value of them.
No, it's a component. Other components would be to do more structured interviews.
Mm-hmm. So tell us what you mean by that.
Well, first, an unstructured interview is an interview where we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know where it's going to take us. We start talking to the salesperson. We get a story. We get an example. We go down a different path. Then we pass that salesperson to the next interviewer, and they have their own way of interviewing them. And then they go to a third person, and they have their own way. Then we all get together, and we have this sort of anecdotal recall of what happened. So that would be an unstructured process. A structured process would be getting in 10 salespeople and asking them all the same questions. In the same order.
I agree. I'm a huge believer in this. I mean, this is
So this needs some thought and preparation, but once you do that work, you can use that ongoing, right? So you really need to think about the key questions to be asking, and then ideally following that, we should get them to do a piece of work.
Right? 100%.
Right. So if we do the independent assessment, we do a structured interview, then we get them to do a small piece of work that's very relevant to the sales situations we find ourselves in, we're going to make much better decisions. But I couldn't think of a handful of companies that are following that process at the moment.
Yeah, interestingly, it's our organization. I don't see many sales teams doing it. My wife works at a big academic institution here in New York, and they do it for employees. They do it for the interviews they have for prospective students. She teaches at a medical school here. So prospective applicants or applicants who are prospective students, they do a very structured interviewing process. And I think for in the spirit of what we're talking about, future proofing, is that you have to have the structured hiring process as you described. I mean, I'm a huge believer that what you do is you identify your steps in your process. And, a step could be the aptitude test, step could be the assessment, step could be the structured interviews. I still think one person needs to do the deep dive interview that goes through the resume, like the hiring manager maybe. But that, you have 3 or 4 people are assigned to do the structured interview. But every step has a point value. Right, you score. You score this. So at the end, you say, "Look, my hiring range is between maybe the total max points. So this is 45 points, and I'm only going to hire people that are 38 or better." But to the point about future proofing, what that does then is you can then 2 years from now, when you're looking at hiring somebody new, found out, we actually had the best results from people that were 42 to 36s. I mean, it's like, or 42. We get data to say, okay, how do I improve my process? How do I perfect it? And that doesn't exist in sales hiring today. And so I think if you're trying to build,
and even if we have an eye to the future, which folks are we bringing in that might have team leader or management potential?
Exactly.
If we're in a fast growing mode,
that could be part of your structured interview questions.
We're trying to attract folks with 3 to 5 years experience to get on the phones, but maybe they're not. They're looking for a team lead role. We can test them to be a team leader, but say, hey, you got to be on the phone for a year, and then we'll take you to team leader, and we know that they're ready for that already. So it can be useful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think the lesson for people listening is that whatever you're doing with hiring is you have to quantify what it is that you want to hire and quantify the results and keep your records and look at the outcomes you're receiving with the people that you hired compared to the scores that you wanted people to have, And then you give yourself a way to start training yourself to recruit and hire the people you want. And that feedback loop over time, I'm not sure I've seen any company that does that with sales hiring. And it's crazy.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen companies that offer that service to companies, like it's outsourced. And, they have the tools and everything that do the tracking, and they feed in the sales performance data into the system.
Okay.
And so you can get a very strong correlation between which guys or girls are performing well and what attributes they had, at the time they did the testing. And and that uses machine learning to just keep improving the hiring process. So that's how it should evolve. And also, like we talked about, roles evolve, things change. And as that gets updated, so it should be, again, this sort of living, breathing system.
Right. But the fact is, for even a small company that has a handful of salespeople, you can still do this. It's just, you can do it all in a spreadsheet. I mean, it doesn't require an application or an addition to your tech stack or anything. It's just, do a Google sheet and just, it'll be there, and just start adding data to it as you start hiring additional people. So, and the same thing's true as like with forecasting. I mean, in sales, again, I know there's some companies that do it. I personally haven't seen any where they train managers on how to forecast and provide a feedback loop on it so that they continue to improve their forecasting skills.
Yeah, I think my background in Dell may be a PhD in forecasting, but it was very good on your pipeline at week 6 at this much. You're definitely going to end up here based on the last 18 quarters of performance and different variables, and a small army of analysts doing that. But not many companies have that, though, right? No, they don't. So there's a lot of upside in implementing just a basic, back of the envelope version of that.
For so many companies, the vast majority of companies, certainly here in the States, is it's back of the envelope forecasting. Bottoms up. Reps submit it to the manager. The manager looks at it, tweaks it. It goes to the next level, gets tweaked. Yada yada yada. Fine, that's okay. But you have to be giving people feedback on it, and help them learn how they could do it better. And it starts with the data, and the data again. The data's out. The data's out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's it's sort of the theme as I was building to, and that is you addressed it somewhat in your book. Is we have to, one of the best ways to use the technology to improve productivity of sales overall is to track this type of data.
Yeah, and most companies have huge amounts of data available. It's using it
big enterprise does, certainly,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
We got a lot of small and mid-sized businesses that listen to the show, and you've got the data too. It may take you a little more work to do it manually, but
I agree.
So one of the other topics you talk about want to dig into is developing high converting middle of the funnel capability. So tell people what you meant by that, because we're starting to see this acronym MOFU, M-O-F-U, more frequently. So in your mind, what is that high converting middle of the funnel capability?
Yeah. So again, it's sort of comes back to the specialization, right? So we're going to have our high performing sort of account acquisition or prospecting group, mostly going to be inside focused, generating opportunities and leads. And then we want to have the field sales team who we want to keep them pretty fully occupied, doing high quality meetings with valuable customers or valuable potential customers. And we want that group to be absolutely expert at those middle of funnel activities. Okay, so again, we're getting away from a generalist who may be managing a bunch of existing customers, and their time gets caught up there, and they're doing some prospecting, and they're sort of good at the middle of funnel, but they're not PhD level. So I really want PhD level middle of funnel experts who are just great at engaging with customers, bringing insight to customers, bringing value to customers, and really differentiating our products and our company to the customer. Customers, that they don't want, we know this well, that they don't need someone to come along and educate them about our products or about our company or about how many offices we have. That's we know that doesn't add value, right? We need business people that understand the customer's industry, understand the customer's business, understand the sort of challenges someone in the customer's role has, and be able to bring some value and insight into that. So that's the first part. And then we know that buying in large companies has become much more complex. And we talk, the buying committee topic is a pretty common topic in sales at the moment, where there's a lot of folks involved in buying decisions now. And because when we're talking about buying a SaaS system or buying anything substantial, you're talking about change. You're talking about the customer having to change what they're doing. And then, a lot of people get involved in those decisions when you're talking about change. And there's a lot of folks who can say no,
exactly.
who don't want to change. And we need to be skilled at working with the key buyer or the key contact we're dealing with who wants this solution. And we need to be working with them. Okay, how are we going to navigate this buying committee or the other stakeholders, and work with them and help them to do that effectively? And then there's a number of techniques. You get into building our value proposition, building the business case, not just winning the beauty contest. So we see a lot of salespeople able to get the customer convinced that we have the best solution. Okay, so I've got the best security solution for your company versus 5 other competitors, but that doesn't get you the deal. And there's plenty of salespeople I've seen come to me and say, "Hey, I got the design win. They had the budget. I had great support, but I didn't get the deal." All right, because that's only half the deal. The other half is getting it through this buying committee and getting it approved. And when you're getting to that level, now we're starting to compete maybe with other projects and other priorities in the business.
Yep.
That have nothing to do with what we're selling. And so we do have to have that very strong business case. We need to have, the different stakeholders aligned. So I want folks, and we've got to be training our sales folks on how to manage through, that whole complex process. And then at the end of it, of course, we want to get a good outcome for us, and we want a good outcome for the customer. So, high level, highly tuned negotiation skills, I think, are very important for this function as well, to make sure.
Well, yeah. So, question about that, because just this week I published a piece saying that sales should not be involved in negotiation. And I feel very strongly about that. Sales are horrible negotiators, and I think if you're selling anything of any complexity, especially and you see this as a problem a lot of times in high growth sales teams, is that the managers, the sales reps themselves, they take on this role of negotiating, and really, they're not specialists at it. If you want to close a deal, get a deal through procurement in this more complex environment, you really should use contract professionals. I mean, that's from my way, when I was growing high growth sales teams, one of the most valuable people I had. Because when we got customers rarely enter into negotiations on a parallel basis with multiple vendors, because it's a waste of time. They make their vendor choice, they enter into negotiations. So at that point, my perspective, if we want to, I think, start future-proofing sales to some degree, that's not the seller's job. We're talking about specialization of roles, right? Yeah. Negotiation is not a specialized skill.
If you have the scale and you're talking about pretty substantial, multi-million dollar contracts, I've had experience with that, and I think it can work really well.
I don't think it has to be that big of a contract. I think if you have $100,000 contracts, that you maybe you start with your outside attorney for a bit, but get the salesperson out of the loop, because they're not good at it. You're trying to preserve margin. The only thing salespeople are really skilled at is giving discounts.
Yeah,
to win a deal, splitting the difference.
No, I think it's a challenge, and hence I highlight, they need to have negotiation skills if they're going to be negotiating deals. I guess that's another solution is to bring in a specialist, but in reality, most companies aren't going to do that. So, well, I think at least give them some basic. And I've got a couple of basic frameworks for negotiation. At least slightly complexify the deal. Don't just get into a product and a price discussion. Let's try and bring in some other elements that we can trade off, right? That's at least be doing that. At least be doing that basic thing.
And none of them relate to price. So directly, right? Yeah. So you do want to have your salespeople, especially more complex deals, is trained in this trade-off. You call it negotiation. Yes. I call it trade-offs. Is that?
Cool.
Yeah, customer says, well, we really need to have this price because it's not quite at our budget. This price, that's fine. So let's just look at the scope. How about if we just, we get you that price, but we just can't do X, Y, Z. Oh, no. We really need to have X, Y, Z. Oh, okay. Well, maybe there's something else. No, we really, okay. Yeah, just as long as you're on that basis, a salesperson can do that type of trade-off with someone. And that's appropriate that they should. But once you get into nits and grits, nitty gritty of the contract, that really shouldn't be the subject.
Detail, I'm talking more. Okay, I'd like to introduce maybe a term commitment. I'd like to talk about maybe the terms of termination, payment terms, value-added services. Just bring in some other elements away from price.
Yeah. No, I agree, and then you position the seller to say, okay,
or even referenceability. Sometimes you can trade off referenceability for some better terms for the customer. If the customers would stand up and introduce you to 5 other similar accounts, then you can be maybe more flexible. So just bringing in some of those elements.
So we just have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to dig more into some of the middle of funnel things. You talked about sort of business acumen type capabilities, which I think are hugely important and vastly underrepresented in our sales force in general, and worldwide. But I think things like qualification, discovery, needs analysis, things that are these, again, sort of core middle funnel skills, are getting short shrift. And I think that
I agree.
Taking your point about we need to develop those capabilities, I think that's from an individual standpoint. I think that's when you combine that with the business acumen you described, if you can get those skills down, you start future-proofing yourself a little bit. Considering,
I think so.
If you're assuming that you continue to learn, because for me, the only way to really future-proof yourself, the only thing you can really do is just commit yourself to keep on learning, right? Because things are going to change. So as long as you're staying on top of change by continuing to learn, proactively learning, that's really key. And I think these middle funnel skills, business acumen, discovery, qualification needs, and all those things, there's so much talk about prospecting. Right? We spent a good chunk of the show talking about prospecting.
No, Andy, I think if I size, prospecting to me is about this big.
Well, give us words, because most people are listening, not watching.
I think closing's about this big, but I think discovery is like this big. All right. I just think that the middle part of the sale, and we do huge focus over here on this shiny object of account acquisition and prospecting, and then closing used to get a lot of attention. And how do you close deals? I want a closer and all this nonsense, right?
Yeah.
But we know closing's quite easy if we do discovery and the gap analysis and establish
exactly
right. All this stuff. That's where we have to be spending time. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I was making this comment to somebody yesterday.
And you don't solve this by reading a book or doing a course for a couple of days. This is a very intense, ongoing commitment to being able to do that. It's not a trivial skill.
No, and I was making a comment to somebody just a couple of days ago, but you look at the conferences that are available in the sales world, and there's disproportionate number of them devoted to prospecting.
Yeah, no, outbound.
Yeah, which I think is a great idea. I mean,
it's awesome. Yeah,
know and respect the guys that do it. They're friends of mine.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, where's the show on qualification? Where's the show on discovery?
Yes.
Because arguably, as you pointed out, in your example, you were using your fist to describe the relative importance of prospecting and closing, and you're drawing a huge circle for the middle of the funnel.
There's opportunity for you and I to start a conference then.
Well, let's do, because I think that this is really something it's a critical issue. And again, we're talking about how do people prepare themselves for the future is an illustration I used to sort of I'll run it by you, see if you buy into it. You're an Australian, you should understand this. So I use triathlon as sort of the analogy. So 3 sports: swimming, biking, running. The top pros, if they do an Ironman triathlon, roughly 8 hours to complete it. Swimming's first. Swimming takes, you swim 2.5 miles, ride 112, run a 26.2 mile marathon. The swimming takes roughly 10% of the total thing.
Right.
And when you talk to professional triathletes, and I've swum with a bunch in my swimming training in the past, they always just say, well, you never win a triathlon on the swim leg. But you have to be competent at it. You have to be able to complete it. You can't be dead last coming out of the water. So to me, that's like prospecting. We have to be good at it.
Yeah.
But when you look at the relative scale of what you have to work on as an organization, as a sales team, it's really those last 2 parts that get you across the finish line. And I think we sort of ignore them, to my point about a discovery show or a conference on qualification. Yet arguably, they're way more important. Yes, you can't do anything to get a prospect, but you're not going to get across the finish line if you aren't masters of these skills in the middle of the funnel.
Oh, yeah. And you're going to be very good at prospecting if you master that discovery and insight and everything anyway. I think.
But there's different people doing it though, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yes.
To your point. So anyway, all right, there's our conference idea. We'll chat about that offline.
Absolutely.
So we've run out of time, but tell people how to get in contact with you and learn more about your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can check out my website, growthacumen.com.au, and there's a book page on there with a future-proof sales strategy. You can find me on LinkedIn, Stephen Norman, or my handle is Growth Coach, growth-coach, linkedin.com/growth coach. And so look forward to engaging with everyone. Thanks a lot, Andy.
Yeah, well, Steve, thank you, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. Great to join you today.
Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for this week. First of all, as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me here, and I also want to thank my guest, Steve Norman, joining us all the way from Australia. Join me again next week, as my guest will be Dale Dupree. Dale, whose online persona is the copier warrior, has a really great perspective on sales. I think you'll really enjoy it. Make sure you join me then. And before you go, don't forget to check out The Sales House, the all-in-one sales performance accelerator for B2B sellers just like you. Visit thesaleshouse.com. So thanks again for joining me. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Until next week, good selling, everyone.